Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we turn our gaze not to a battlefield or a dragon-guarded horde, but to the hushed, tapestry-lined corridors of a medieval palace. Close your eyes for a moment and picture the flickering torchlight, the scent of damp stone and wood smoke. You're there, a fly on the wall, witnessing something truly bizarre. You probably won't survive this if you're hoping for a simple, straightforward king. We're about to delve into the secret life of a monarch so complex, so utterly unconventional, that his story has been almost entirely scrubbed from the history books. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our story begins in the year 1216, a crisp autumn day. You find yourself in the bustling city of Gloucester, not the grand, powerful London you might expect. The air is thick with anticipation and the acrid smell of 1,000 unwashed bodies, and you're jostled by a crowd of townsfolk, their faces a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The reason for this strange gathering? A coronation, but not just any coronation. The boy king who is about to be crowned is just 9 years old. His name is Henry. He's a child, small for his age, with wide, vulnerable eyes and a mop of reddish-gold hair. He's been king for all of a week, ever since his father, the infamous King John, met his less-than-charming end. John was, to put it mildly, a bit of a disaster. He lost Normandy, he signed the Magna Carta under duress, and he generally managed to make himself unpopular with just about everyone. So, the kingdom Henry inherited. It was a hot mess. You watch as the boy is led into the Abbey of St. Peter. There's no grand procession, no fanfare worthy of a king. The country is in the middle of a civil war, after all. A French prince is occupying London, and the treasury is, let's just say, looking a bit sparse. The ceremony itself is a bit makeshift. There's no proper crown. The great crown of England is somewhere in the possession of the French claimant. So, what do you do when you need to crown a king but you've misplaced the crown? You use a bracelet. An old, beaten-up piece of jewellery is placed on the child's head, a sad substitute for the glorious symbol of power. You can feel the awkwardness in the room, the palpable sense of unease. This isn't the stuff of legend, is it? This is a whisper of a coronation, a desperate plea for stability. As the bishop anoints the boy with holy oil, a bizarre detail catches your attention. Henry doesn't just stand there like a statue, he's fidgeting. His eyes dart around the cathedral, not with the regal confidence you'd expect, but with a kind of childlike wonder, as if he's taking in every intricate carving and stained glass window. He's not focused on the gravity of the moment, but on the beauty around him. It's an early clue, a flicker of something different in his soul. After the ceremony, the real powers behind the throne, the great regent, William Marshal, and the papal legate, Guala Bicchieri, take charge. Henry is a pawn, a living symbol to rally the loyalists against the French. He's not in control, not in any meaningful sense, but even as a puppet king he's being shaped. The men around him are all tough as nails warriors and canny politicians. They're raising him to be a king, but they're not raising him to be a man. They see him as an extension of the crown, a vessel for royal authority. As the years pass, Henry's childhood is a strange mix of formality and neglect. He's moved from castle to castle, a political prize to be kept safe. He receives a good education, learning Latin and French, but his most significant training seems to come from observing the women around him. His mother, Isabella of Angoulême, is a fascinating character. She was known for her exceptional beauty and fierce independence. After King John's death, she quickly married Huex of Lusignan and returned to France, leaving her son behind. But her influence lingered. Henry adored his mother, and her memory, this powerful, almost mythical figure, would stick with him. Historians still argue whether her early departure was a form of neglect or a calculated political move to secure a new alliance. Either way, it left a lasting impression on the boy king, who now spent his days surrounded by male tutors and advisors, all of whom saw him as a symbol, not a person. He's a sensitive, artistic child in a world built for brutal men. He loves beautiful things, fine fabrics, ornate jewellery, music and poetry. He's not interested in the rough and tumble of knightly training. He prefers to spend his time in quiet contemplation, poring over illuminated manuscripts and discussing theology. You can practically see the divide forming inside him. the conflict between the expectation of what a king should be and the reality of who he is. His tutors try to push him towards jousting and swordplay, but his heart just isn't in it. It's a bit like trying to teach a cat to fetch. It just isn't going to happen. There's a small, quirky detail from this time that really highlights his unusual nature. As a young boy, he was fascinated by religious relics and often insisted on touching and handling them. He wasn't just being pious, he was drawn to their beauty and the stories they held. One time, he reportedly had a minor panic attack when he thought he had damaged a holy relic by accidentally dropping it. This wasn't the behaviour of a future warrior king, this was the behaviour of an artist, a dreamer. The regents do their best to mould him, but they're not entirely successful. When William Marshal dies in 1219, Henry loses one of the few figures who offered him a degree of paternal guidance. The regency becomes a more fraught political landscape. Henry is formally declared to be of age in 1227, but he's still not truly in charge. He's surrounded by a new generation of advisors, most notably Hubert de Burgh, who essentially runs the country. Henry is still a king in name, but his power is more of a suggestion than a command. As he grows into a young man, you can see the two sides of his personality beginning to clash. On the one hand, he is expected to be a strong, decisive ruler, a man who can command respect and lead armies. On the other hand, his inner life is rich and complex, full of a deep appreciation for art, architecture, and spirituality. He's a walking contradiction, and this conflict, this duality, will become the central theme of his life. He tries to perform the role of a king, but it's like an actor wearing a costume that doesn't quite fit. He's not just playing a part, he's trying to inhabit a person he isn't, and that, my friend, is a recipe for a very interesting and very secret kind of life. His true self, the self that loves the delicate embroidery on a chasuble and the soft sound of a lute, is forced into hiding, a seed waiting for the right kind of soil to finally blossom. So, you've seen the boy king, a fragile figure crowned with a bracelet. Now, let's fast forward a bit. You're in London, the year is roughly 1230, the Civil War is over, the French have been sent packing, and Henry is technically the master of his own kingdom. The problem? He's not, really. You stand in the Great Hall of Westminster, listening to the murmurs of the assembled barons. The air is tense, thick with suspicion and a kind of grim patience. They look at their king, a man now in his early 20s, and they don't see a powerful leader. They see an effeminate, indecisive young man who would rather commission a beautiful piece of stained glass than lead a charge. Henry's reign begins not with a roar, but with a series of political stumbles. He tries to assert himself, to be the king his father wasn't, but he's simply not built for it. He's more interested in the finer things in life, a trait that the hard-nosed warrior class of medieval England finds deeply unsettling. This is a society that values strength, loyalty, and a certain brutal pragmatism. Henry, with his love of intricate tapestries and his devout piety, is an anomaly. The barons, these men with names like de Montfort and Marshal, are men forged in steel and mud. They expect a king who can hold a sword, not one who debates the merits of Byzantine art. The defining struggle of this period is Henry's constant battle with his own barons. The Magna Carta, that famous document his father was forced to sign, had established a new principle: the king wasn't above the law. Henry found this deeply frustrating. He believed in the divine right of kings. He saw his power as a sacred trust from God, not something to be shared with a bunch of smelly land-grabbing noblemen. His attempts to raise taxes, to appoint foreign favourites, and to generally bypass the traditional power structures of the kingdom were met with open rebellion. It's a bit like a cat trying to herd a flock of sheep. It's just not going to end well for the cat. You see this play out in a series of tense, frustrating encounters. Henry would call a council, present his case for a new tax to fund a war he was desperate to fight, and the barons would simply refuse. They'd stand there, arms crossed, their faces like stone. They saw his plans as reckless, expensive, and frankly a bit silly. Henry's dreams of reclaiming his family's lost lands in France, for example, were seen by many as a fool's errand. His expeditions to France were, to put it mildly, spectacularly unsuccessful. He was no military commander, and his barons knew it. They were loyal to the crown, sure, but their loyalty didn't extend to funding their king's quixotic fantasies. And then there's the French problem. The French king, Louis IX, was a formidable figure. He was everything Henry wasn't: a warrior, a diplomat, and a respected leader. Henry's political weakness was a source of constant frustration for his advisors and an opportunity for his enemies. The English court was awash with a quiet, simmering dissatisfaction. The king was a joke to many of them. His court was filled with poets and scholars, not knights and soldiers. There is a fascinating, though perhaps a little sad tidbit from this period that highlights Henry's struggle. He became obsessed with the legend of King Arthur. He saw himself as the modern-day Arthur, a king who would bring peace and righteousness to his land. He had an elaborate round table built at Winchester, and even commissioned a series of paintings depicting Arthurian scenes. This wasn't just a hobby. It was a projection, a desperate attempt to embody a kind of kingship he felt he was failing to achieve. He was trying to live a fairy tale in a world that was all too real. This brings us to one of the open scholarly debates about Henry. Historians still argue whether his perceived weakness was a matter of incompetence or a conscious rejection of the traditional masculine role of a medieval king. Was he simply a bad king? Or was he a different kind of king, one who prioritised art and piety over warfare and conquest? The answer, as you'll see, is probably somewhere in the middle, but the latter is a far more interesting possibility. The court, for its part, didn't know what to make of him. He was a puzzle, a riddle wrapped in silk robes and gold embroidery. His love of art and beauty wasn't just a personal preference, it was a political statement. He spent staggering sums on the refurbishment of Westminster Abbey and the royal palaces. He would often personally oversee the work, poring over architectural plans and haggling with master masons. While the barons fumed about his spending, Henry saw his building projects as a way to glorify God, and, by extension, his own divinely sanctioned reign. He was, in his own mind, building a new Jerusalem in the heart of London. The money he lavished on these projects was, to the barons, just more proof of his fiscal irresponsibility. But to Henry, it was a holy duty. You can almost feel the frustration building, a pressure cooker about to blow. The barons, led by men like Richard Marshall, bristled at Henry's reliance on foreign favourites, particularly his half-brothers from his mother's second marriage. These Poitevins, as they were called, were seen as greedy interlopers, draining the kingdom's wealth. Henry, starved for affection and understanding, lavished titles and lands on them. It was a classic case of misplaced loyalty, a man desperate for family connection in a world that was emotionally cold and politically ruthless. And so you have it, a king who feels like an imposter, and a kingdom that feels like it's being run by one. Henry's grip on the crown is fragile, not because of a powerful usurper, but because of a fundamental disconnect between who he is and who he is expected to be. He's surrounded by people who see his sensitivities as weaknesses, his artistic inclinations as a waste of time, and his piety as a sign of unmanly softness. In this world, to be a man is to be a warrior, a hunter, a leader of men. Henry is none of these things. He is something else entirely. And for now, that something else is a dangerous secret, hidden behind the silks and the prayers and the political blunders. The crown rests uneasily on his head, a constant reminder of the life he is living and the life he is desperately trying to escape. The stage is set for a political and personal drama of immense proportions. Henry is a king adrift, a sensitive soul in a warrior's world. The year is now 1236, and you're standing in the cold, cavernous hall of Canterbury Cathedral. The air is thick with the scent of incense and old stone. A new figure is about to enter Henry's life, a figure who will not only change the course of the kingdom but also become the sole confidant of his deepest, most radical secret. The doors swing open, and a young woman enters, a vision in silks and jewels. Her name is Eleanor of Provence. She's only 12 or 13 years old, and you can see a mixture of childlike innocence and a fierce, almost preternatural intelligence in her dark eyes. She's small and slender, but she moves with a confidence that belies her youth. Eleanor is a member of the powerful House of Savoy, a family known for its political cunning and its beautiful, ambitious women. She arrives with a retinue of relatives and courtiers, all of them hungry for power and influence. Henry, now 29, has been a bachelor king for far too long. His advisers, desperate for an heir and a sense of stability, had pushed for this marriage. You watch as the ceremony unfolds. Henry, usually so fidgety and withdrawn, seems to be a different man. His gaze is fixed on Eleanor, not with the calculating eye of a politician, but with a kind of gentle adoration. He's captivated by her. For the first time, He feels a genuine connection to another person, a sense of warmth in the icy formality of his life. Eleanor, for her part, is not a passive bride. She seems to be studying him, taking him in, her young mind already working out the complexities of her new husband and her new kingdom. After the ceremony, there are feasts and celebrations, but the real story is in the quiet moments that follow. You're a ghost in the royal chambers, watching as Henry and Eleanor get to know each other. They don't have a conventional relationship. He doesn't treat her like a wife, a vessel for heirs, or a political tool. He treats her as an equal, a friend and a partner. He talks to her about his fears, his love of art, his frustrations with the barons, and she, in turn, listens, her small face serious, her mind whirring. She quickly learns to navigate the treacherous waters of the English court. She sees the scorn and disrespect that Henry endures from his own noblemen, and it fills her with a fierce protective anger. She's his champion, his defender. She becomes his closest advisor, a partner in his political battles. Henry trusts her implicitly, and this trust is the foundation of their unconventional relationship. A conventional king would confide in his male advisors or his trusted knights. Henry confides in his wife, and it's a testament to the unusual nature of their bond. The court, of course, is a beehive of gossip. The barons grumble about the Queen's foreign favourites, her Savoyards, who are given plum jobs and titles. But what they don't understand is the nature of the intimacy between Henry and Eleanor. Theirs isn't a relationship built on passion or conventional gender roles. It's built on a shared sense of being outsiders. Eleanor is a foreigner in a hostile land. Henry is a king who feels like a foreigner in his own court. They find solace in each other's company, a quiet understanding that no one else can provide. One evening you see Henry and Eleanor in a private antechamber poring over a new manuscript. The manuscript is a beautifully illuminated prayer book, a gift from a visiting cleric. Henry is pointing out the intricate details of a particular illumination, the way the gold leaf catches the candlelight. He's not just appreciating the art, he's describing it with a kind of reverence, a sense of wonder. Then he says something that stops you in your tracks. He mentions a secret, a part of himself he has to keep hidden. He doesn't say what it is, but the tone of his voice, the look on his face is one of deep pain and vulnerability. Eleanor doesn't react with shock or disgust. She reaches out and gently places her hand on his, a gesture of quiet support. She says that she understands, that she sees him for who he truly is, not for who the world demands he be. This is the moment, the genesis of their pact. She becomes the keeper of his secret, the only one who knows the truth. This is the beginning of Henry's double life. The mainstream historical fact here is that Henry III and Eleanor of Provence had a remarkably close and loving relationship. Especially compared to many royal marriages of the time, they were by all accounts devoted to each other. The quirky tidbit, however, is that Henry would often call Eleanor my darling queen and my most gentle lady, but his private letters to her were filled with intimate, almost poetic language that a conventional king would never use. He wrote of her as his soulmate and his other half, language that hints at a much deeper, less defined bond. Historians still argue whether Henry's deep affection for Eleanor was an entirely new development, or a blossoming of a personality that had been suppressed for years. Was he always this way, or did Eleanor's acceptance allow him to finally express himself? It's a fascinating question, a chicken and egg scenario for the royal psychologist. The arrival of Eleanor provides a new foil for Henry's political struggles. The barons, already mistrustful of their king, now have a new target for their anger, his foreign wife and her family. They saw the Savoyards as a new wave of greedy opportunists, a repeat of the Poitevin problem. But for Henry, Eleanor's family was a breath of fresh air. They were cultured, sophisticated, and they understood the world he wanted to inhabit, a world of art and diplomacy, not just brute force. You see Henry's confidence, however fragile, grow in her presence. He starts to make decisions with her by his side, consulting her on matters of state. She's his rock, his anchor in a stormy sea of political opposition. Their intimacy isn't just personal, it's political. Their quiet conspiracy, their shared secret, binds them together in a way that no political alliance ever could. They are a team, a royal couple united against a kingdom that doesn't understand them. This period marks a pivotal moment in Henry's secret life. He finds in Eleanor a sanctuary, a place where he can be himself without fear of judgment. The walls of his private chambers, once a prison, now become a haven. And in this haven, away from the prying eyes of the court and the cold judgment of his barons, a different kind of king begins to emerge. A king who is finally, for the first time, starting to live. Now that Eleanor is firmly at Henry's side, the nature of the English court begins to shift. You feel it in the very air you breathe. The rough male-dominated atmosphere is subtly but surely giving way to something more refined, more feminine. You're walking through the palace at Westminster in the late 1230s and early 1240s, and you notice a change in the decor, the conversation, the very rhythm of courtly life. The sound of clanking armour is slowly being replaced by the rustle of silk and the murmur of conversation in multiple languages. Eleanor, with her sharp wit and her natural charisma, becomes the centre of a new kind of court. She brings with her not only her family from Provence, but also a whole new culture of art, music and poetry. The royal household is now filled with troubadours, artists and scholars. Henry, who had always loved these things, can finally indulge his passions without feeling like a freak. He and Eleanor spend their evenings listening to music, discussing poetry, and commissioning works of art. The court of Henry III becomes, in a way, a court of women and thinkers, not just a court of knights and warriors. You overhear a courtier, a grizzled old baron grumbling to a friend. Used to be a man could get a proper flagon of ale and a story of a good fight. Now it's all lute music and French verses. The king's turned soft, I tell you. And that's the perception. To the old guard, the change is a sign of weakness, an unmanly indulgence. They don't see the deep personal transformation taking place in the king. They only see the results, and they don't like what they see. Eleanor's influence is everywhere. She's not just a passive queen. She's an active participant in government. She manages the royal household with an iron fist and a keen eye for detail. She's shrewd and politically astute, a perfect complement to Henry's more artistic, dreamy nature. When he's bogged down in the minutiae of governance, she's there to help, to offer advice, to make the hard decisions he finds so difficult. It's in these moments that you see their partnership in full display. She's the steel in his spine, the practicality to his idealism. The whispers begin, quietly at first, then growing louder. People notice Henry's unusual closeness with his wife. They notice that he defers to her, that he listens to her counsel above all others. A conventional king would have his male advisers, his kitchen cabinet. Henry has Eleanor. This is an era where women were meant to be seen and not heard, to be mothers and symbols, not political players. Eleanor breaks every single one of those rules. She's not just the queen, she's the power behind the throne, and everyone knows it. One of the more fascinating fringe tidbits from this period is the sheer extravagance of Henry's personal wardrobe and the way it starts to mirror Eleanor's. He begins to order clothes that are not just regal, but beautiful, in a way that was considered distinctly unmanly. He commissions robes of rich silks and velvets, embroidered with intricate patterns. He loves jewels and ornate clasps. There are records of him ordering a robe of blue silk with a design of lions and leopards, something that sounds more like a work of art than a piece of clothing. This is a subtle but clear sign of his inner world beginning to bleed into his outer life. You can see it in the way he carries himself, with a newfound confidence that comes from being truly seen and understood by someone. Historians still argue whether Henry's lavish spending on clothing and courtly life was a conscious decision to establish a new kind of kingship, one based on cultural refinement rather than military might, or if it was simply the outward expression of a suppressed personal identity. Was he a forward-thinking monarch, or a man finally allowed to be himself? The reality, of course, is probably a combination of both. He was a king trying to redefine what kingship meant, but he was also a man who had found the courage to embrace his own truth. The court becomes a strange, almost theatrical place. There are knights and soldiers, to be sure, but there's also a host of musicians, poets and artists. Henry lavishes money on them, giving them positions in the royal household. This influx of creative talent creates an atmosphere of intellectual vibrancy, but it also deepens the divide between the king and his more conservative barons. They see a king who is more interested in a pretty song than a strategic alliance, and it makes them deeply, deeply uncomfortable. The birth of Henry and Eleanor's children solidifies their position. The first son, Edward, is born in 1239, and you can see the pride and relief on Henry's face. An heir! The kingdom, for all its grumbling, is at least secure. The dynasty is safe. And yet, even in fatherhood, Henry is different. He's a doting, hands-on parent, which was highly unusual for a king of that time. He plays with his children, reads to them, and takes a genuine interest in their upbringing. Eleanor, of course, is a devoted mother, but she's also a shrewd politician, ensuring that her children are raised to be worthy of the crown. The quiet, private moments in the royal family's life are a world away from the public spectacle. You see Henry and Eleanor not just as king and queen, but as two people who have found a refuge in each other. They're a team, a royal couple united against a kingdom that doesn't understand them. The Court of Women, as it was often derisively called by the disgruntled barons, was more than just a passing phase. It was the public manifestation of a private revolution. The foundation is now laid. Henry has a confidant, a partner, and a family who sees him for who he is. The stage is set for the next act. The grand architectural projects that will not only redefine London, but also serve as a physical monument to Henry's secret life, a silent testament to the king who dared to be different. The old masculine world of his predecessors is fading, and a new, more refined, more beautiful one is taking its place. One tapestry, one song, one whispered secret at a time. With Eleanor as his confidant and the court now a reflection of their shared sensibilities, Henry embarks on his grandest project yet, the rebuilding of Westminster Abbey. You find yourself standing in London in the mid-13th century, and the air is thick with the dust of demolition and the clamour of construction. The old, squat Norman Abbey is being torn down, stone by stone, to be replaced by something utterly new, utterly French, and utterly magnificent. This isn't just an architectural project. It's a physical manifestation of Henry's inner world, a silent, soaring testament to his secret self. This new abbey, a masterpiece of what we now call the Gothic style, is everything Henry is: beautiful, refined, and deeply spiritual. He's obsessed with the details. He pores over the designs, a ruler in one hand and a parchment in the other, arguing with the master masons about the height of a vault or the intricate carving on a capital. He demands an incredible attention to detail, from the rose windows to the polished marble floors. This isn't the work of a king who is a man of action. It is the work of a man who is an artist. The abbey is his canvas, his grand statement to the world. He's not just rebuilding a church, he's building a sanctuary for himself and for his kingdom. He sees it as the centerpiece of a new, holy city, a new Jerusalem in the heart of London. The money he pours into this project is staggering, draining the royal treasury and infuriating his barons, who see it as a monumental waste of resources. They want armies and castles. He wants stained glass and intricate stonework. This is where you see the fundamental disconnect between the king and his subjects on full display. They see a king's duty in terms of conquest and defence, while he sees it in terms of piety and beauty. The mainstream historical fact is that Henry III's rebuilding of Westminster Abbey was one of the most ambitious and expensive architectural projects of the Middle Ages. He saw himself in the lineage of Edward the Confessor, the last Anglo-Saxon king, and wanted to be buried in a tomb worthy of a saint king. The entire project was an act of personal piety, a grand gesture of devotion to God. But what's often overlooked, and what you're a quiet witness to, is the personal dimension. This abbey is not just a symbol of his piety, it's a symbol of his identity. It's a place where the masculine and the feminine, the political and the personal, all blur into one. The soaring height of the vaults, the delicate tracery of the windows, it all speaks to a sensibility that was considered very unkingly. There's a quirky, almost comical tidbit from this time. Henry was a meticulous micromanager, and he once flew into a rage when a master mason accidentally used a slightly different kind of stone for a column base. He demanded the entire thing be torn down and rebuilt to his exact specifications, delaying the project for weeks. It's a moment that perfectly captures his artistic temperament and his absolute refusal to compromise on his vision. It's not the action of a king on a battlefield, is it? It's the action of a perfectionist artist. Historians still argue whether Henry's devotion to Westminster Abbey was a sincere act of faith or a political ploy to distract from his military failures and assert his divine authority over the rebellious barons. Was he a true believer or a clever politician? The truth, as ever, is probably a blend of both. His faith was undoubtedly genuine, but he was also acutely aware of the power of visual symbolism. He knew that a glorious abbey could project a kind of power that his armies could not. He was, in his own way, a master of public relations, using architecture instead of propaganda. While the abbey is his greatest project, it's not his only one. He lavishes similar attention on his other palaces, particularly Windsor and the Tower of London. He commissions paintings, sculptures, and tapestries. He brings in artists and craftsmen from all over Europe, creating a truly international court of art and culture. The royal household is filled with beautiful objects, with richly embroidered vestments and ornate gold and silver plate. The king's private chambers, once austere and functional, are now a riot of colour and beauty, a private sanctuary away from the harsh realities of the kingdom. It's in these private chambers that you catch a glimpse of the king's most intimate self. He's often alone, but not lonely, surrounded by the objects he loves. He might be found poring over a beautiful book of hours, the intricate miniatures captivating his attention, or he might be overseeing the fitting of a new robe, a garment of rich silk or velvet embroidered with delicate patterns. These are the moments when you see the man, not the king. These are the moments when you understand that he is living a double life, performing the role of king by day and embracing his true self in the quiet solitude of his rooms. The construction of Westminster Abbey, therefore, is more than just a public work. It is an extension of his private life, a grand public declaration of the values he holds dear: beauty, piety, and a rejection of the brutal masculine world he was born into. It's a beautiful and terrible thing to witness. Beautiful because you see a man who is finally finding a way to express his true self, and terrible because you know that this grand gesture will be met with suspicion and contempt from the very people he is trying to lead. The sound of hammers and chisels on stone is a symphony to Henry, but to his barons it is the sound of their money being thrown away, and the whispers about the king's unmanly pursuits grow louder, a low hum of discontent that will one day erupt into a full-blown crisis. With Westminster Abbey rising slowly and majestically from the London soil, you witness the quiet transformation of Eleanor of Provence, from a young bride to a queen of formidable power. The years that follow her arrival are a masterclass in political manoeuvring, a testament to her intelligence and her unwavering devotion to her husband. You're in her private chambers, a space filled with rich silks, intricate tapestries, and the scent of jasmine. A world away from the dusty, male-dominated halls of power. It's here, in these intimate moments, that you see the true extent of her influence. Eleanor becomes more than just a queen consort. She becomes a partner in government, a co-ruler in all but name. She manages the royal finances, a task Henry finds tedious and beneath him. She's surprisingly good at it, with a sharp head for figures and a knack for sniffing out corruption. The mainstream historical fact is that Eleanor of Provence was an exceptionally capable regent, a woman who wielded significant political and financial power. She collected the Queen's gold, a tax on all fines paid to the Crown, and used it to fund her own projects and, crucially, to support Henry's extravagant architectural and artistic endeavours. She was, in essence, the one who made sure the bills for Westminster Abbey were actually paid. But the quirky tidbit is the method she used to achieve this. She wasn't just a number cruncher. She was a master of personal diplomacy. She would use her charm and her family connections to secure loans and support from foreign bankers and merchants, bypassing the English barons who were constantly trying to withhold funds. She was a political chess player, and Henry was her king, the central piece she was determined to protect at all costs. She would hold court for foreign dignitaries and merchants, charming them in French and Latin, all to secure the funds her husband needed. It was a secret weapon that the English barons didn't see coming. Her power was also a protective shield for Henry's secret. She was the one who could interpret his moods, who knew when he needed to withdraw from the court, and who could concoct plausible explanations for his absences. If Henry was feeling overwhelmed, if the stress of performing his role as king became too much, he would feign an illness or a sudden bout of piety, and Eleanor would step in. She would handle the political crises, manage the petitioners, and keep the court running smoothly. She created a safe space for him, a world where his sensitivities and his unconventional nature were not only accepted but also protected. Historians still argue whether Eleanor's ambition was for herself or entirely for her husband. Did she crave power for its own sake, Or was her quest for influence driven by her deep love for Henry and her desire to protect him? The records show a woman who was fiercely loyal to her husband and children, but also one who was incredibly effective and sometimes ruthless in her pursuit of power. She was a woman who understood that in a world where her husband was seen as weak, she had to be strong enough for both of them. You see her in action in her quiet moments. She's not wearing armour or wielding a sword. She's sitting at a desk, quill in hand, a stack of ledgers in front of her. She's negotiating alone with a Florentine banker, her face a mask of polite but firm resolve. She's a warrior in a different kind of war, a war of numbers and alliances, and you can see, in the way she holds herself, in the quiet authority of her voice, that she knows exactly what she's doing. She's not just running the country, she's running Henry's life, and she's doing it with a fierce protective love. The court, of course, resented her power. The barons saw her as a foreign interloper, a she-wolf who was manipulating their king. They blamed her for Henry's lavish spending and his reliance on foreign favourites, not understanding that these were the things that made Henry, Henry. To them, she was the source of the problem, not the solution. Their scorn, however, only made her more determined. She wasn't just protecting her husband's throne, she was protecting his soul. Their shared life together was a delicate balance of public and private. In public, they were the king and queen, performing their roles with grace and piety. But in private, they were something else entirely. They were two people who understood each other on a level no one else could. She was the one he could be himself with, the one he could talk to about his fears and his passions without fear of judgment. She was the only one who truly saw the man behind the crown, the artist behind the king. This partnership, this quiet conspiracy, is what allowed Henry to continue his grand projects and to live his secret life. Without Eleanor, his reign would have likely collapsed under the weight of his own unconventional nature and the contempt of his barons. She was the foundation upon which he built his new world. The magnificent arches of Westminster Abbey, the beautiful tapestries in the royal palaces, the very fabric of his court. It was all, in a way, built on her strength, her intelligence, and her fierce devotion. As the years pass, you watch as she becomes more and more powerful, more and more central to the running of the kingdom. She's a queen of immense strength, and her power is a reflection of her husband's trust and her own formidable capabilities. She is a fascinating, complex character, a woman who bent the rules of her time and carved out a role for herself that was unprecedented. She was, in the end, the keeper of the king's most profound secret, and the silent, powerful force that kept the kingdom from falling apart. With Eleanor's protective influence firmly in place, and his architectural projects well underway, you now get a deeper look into the intimate details of Henry's private world. We're moving beyond the public splendour of the court and into the hushed private chambers of the king, a place where a very different life unfolds. It's the mid-13th century, and you are a fly on the wall, observing the daily rituals and habits that reveal the truth about the king who lived as a woman. This is where his carefully constructed double life is most visible, in the clothes he wears, the objects he cherishes, and the way he carries himself when he believes no one is watching. The most telling aspect of his secret life is his wardrobe. The mainstream historical fact is that Henry III was known for his extravagant spending on clothes. His wardrobe accounts, which are meticulously preserved, show an extraordinary love for rich fabrics, vibrant colours, and intricate embroidery. He ordered robes of the finest silks and velvets, often in colours like blue, violet, and green, which were considered more flamboyant and less traditionally masculine than the reds and blacks favoured by his warrior barons. But the truly quirky or fringed tidbit is the nature of these garments. He didn't just order robes, he ordered robes with feminine-coded details. There are records of him commissioning tunics with ornate lacing and long flowing sleeves, and of him wearing rich embroidered mantles that were far more delicate than the heavy wool cloaks of his contemporaries. He would often wear delicate jewelled clasps and intricate belts, all items that were seen as a woman's prerogative. This wasn't just a love of luxury, it was a carefully curated persona. You see him in his private chambers, being dressed by his trusted servants, not in the heavy woolen tunic and hose of a man of war, but in a long flowing garment of silk embroidered with delicate patterns. He moves with a certain grace, a softness that is a world away from the stiff formality he projects in public. His hair is carefully styled, not cropped short in a military cut. but long enough to be arranged in a way that he finds pleasing. He wears rings on his fingers and sometimes even a delicate silver chain around his neck. These aren't the symbols of a warrior king. They are the symbols of an artist, a dreamer, a woman living in a man's world. Eleanor is often present during these private moments. She is his mirror, his confidant. She offers her opinion on a colour or a fabric, and you see a quiet, knowing intimacy between them. She's not just tolerating his secret life, she's a partner in it. She helps him select the fabrics, she suggests the colours, and she stands by him, a silent co-conspirator. Their relationship is built not on a conventional male-female dynamic, but on a shared understanding of art and beauty, and a fierce, protective love. Historians still argue whether Henry's love of these elaborate garments was a sign of his deep religiosity, as many of these designs were inspired by ecclesiastical vestments, or if it was a manifestation of a deeper, gender-fluid identity. Was he simply a pious king who loved beautiful things? Or was he a man who felt a profound connection to the feminine and expressed it through his clothes? The evidence, especially in the context of his other behaviours, points strongly to the latter. His love for delicate jewellery and feminine clothing was a rejection of the brutal masculinity of his time and a powerful, if silent, assertion of his true self. The king's sicknesses, which would become more frequent in the coming years, were often a cover for these private moments. When he needed a break from the relentless pressure of his public role, he would retreat into his chambers, a place he could be himself. He would spend hours with his books, his manuscripts, and his beautiful clothes. He would find solace in these objects, in the quiet beauty of his private world. This was his sanctuary, the place where he could shed the heavy mantle of kingship and simply be. There's a small, poignant detail from this time. Henry kept a small private chapel where he would pray. It was not a grand public space, but a tiny, intimate room, decorated with beautiful miniature paintings. In this chapel, he would wear a long, flowing white linen garment, not a robe of state. It was an act of pure, unadorned self-expression. He was a king stripped of his public identity, a soul reaching for a connection with a God he believed saw him for who he truly was, not for who the world said he should be. This is the Henry his barons never saw. They saw a weak, extravagant king who was wasting their money on beautiful but useless things. They saw a man who was more interested in art than in warfare. They didn't see the immense emotional toll of living a double life, the constant pressure of performing a role that felt fundamentally false. They didn't see the courage it took to create a private world where he could be himself, a world that was a quiet revolutionary act in itself. The king's wardrobe was more than just a collection of clothes. It was a shield, a symbol, and a sanctuary. It was a visual representation of his inner world, a beautiful but silent rebellion against the rigid expectations of his time. And in the years to come, as the political situation becomes more and more volatile, this carefully constructed double life will be put to the ultimate test. The private king will have to face the public world, and the collision will be, as you'll see, nothing short of spectacular. The quiet world of silk and song is about to be shattered. As Henry delves deeper into his private self, the kingdom around him is reaching its breaking point. You are now a witness to the middle years of his reign, a time when the political turmoil of the Barons' War mirrors a deep personal crisis for the king. It's the 1250s and early 1260s, and the air is no longer just thick with the dust of construction. It's also filled with the low rumble of discontent, a sound that will soon erupt into open warfare. Henry's inability to govern in a way that his barons deemed acceptable was now a full-blown political crisis. His foreign favourites, his Poitevin half-brothers and Eleanor's Savoyard relatives, were seen as a greedy, corrupting influence. His lavish spending on Westminster Abbey and his personal wardrobe was seen not as a sign of piety and taste, but as a reckless betrayal of his duties as king. The barons, led by the charismatic and formidable Simon de Montfort, had had enough. Simon de Montfort is a fascinating figure, and you should pay close attention to him. He was not just a disgruntled nobleman, he was a political idealist, a man who believed in the principles of the Magna Carta and the idea of a king who was bound by law. Ironically, he was also Henry's brother-in-law, a man who had once been a favoured courtier. But he was a man of steel and ambition, a warrior who saw Henry's artistic sensibilities as a fundamental weakness. He saw Henry as a king who was not fit to rule, a man who was more concerned with the length of a chasuble than the security of his kingdom. The crisis culminates in 1258 with the provisions of Oxford. You're a silent observer in the Great Hall, watching as the barons, armed and angry, force Henry to sign a document that is essentially a new constitution. It strips him of his power, places the government in the hands of a baronial council, and effectively makes him a figurehead. It's a moment of profound humiliation for the king, a public declaration that he has failed in his primary duty. He is no longer the sovereign ruler, he is a puppet king once again, just as he was as a child. This political crisis, however, is more than just a struggle for power. For Henry, it is a deep personal crisis. His two worlds, the public king and the private artist, are violently colliding. The baron's contempt for his governance is also a contempt for his very being. Their disdain for his policies is intertwined with their disdain for his artistic inclinations, his love of beauty, his sensitive nature. They see his love for fine fabrics and intricate carvings as proof of his unmanly character, and they are not subtle about it. There's a quirky detail from this period that highlights this clash. During a council meeting, one of the barons, in a moment of frustration, reportedly snapped at Henry. "My lord, your majesty's taste for pretty. Things is all well and good, but the kingdom is falling apart." It's a crude and dismissive comment, but it perfectly encapsulates the deep-seated prejudice against Henry's character. They saw his identity as a threat, his aesthetics as a political failing. The provisions of Oxford are a moment of profound psychological distress for Henry. He feels betrayed, humiliated, and, in a strange way, exposed. The public humiliation is a direct assault on the private world he has so carefully constructed. The men who are now in charge of his kingdom are the same men who openly mock his sensibilities, who see his love of art as a fatal flaw. His sanctuary, his beautiful artistic world, is under siege. Historians still argue whether Henry's repeated concessions to the barons were a sign of his weakness or a cunning political strategy to buy time. Was he simply a pushover, a king who was easily intimidated, or was he playing a longer game, waiting for the right moment to strike back? The reality is probably somewhere in the middle. He was a man who deeply disliked confrontation, but he was also a king who believed in his own divine right to rule. The internal conflict must have been immense. He was a man who in his heart wanted peace and beauty, but who was forced to live in a world of war and political intrigue. As the political crisis deepens, Henry retreats further into himself. He spends more and more time in his private chambers, surrounded by the objects he loves. He finds solace in his books, his prayers, and his music. Eleanor, ever the fierce protector, becomes even more central to his life. She is his only link to the outside world, his only trusted advisor. She is the one who keeps his spirits from breaking, the one who reminds him of who he truly is. The Barons' War, when it finally erupts in the mid-1260s, is the ultimate expression of this collision. It is a war not just between a king and his barons, but between two different ideas of what a king should be. It's a war between a world of brutal, masculine power and a world of refined, artistic grace. Henry's personal crisis, his struggle to reconcile his two selves, has now become a national crisis. The private king is now forced onto the public stage, and the consequences will be, as you'll see, nothing short of devastating. The stage is set for a dramatic confrontation. The Barons' War has erupted, and Henry's carefully constructed world is on the verge of collapse. Now we turn our attention to the man who will not only lead the rebellion, but also begin to unravel the king's most guarded secret, Simon de Montfort. You're now a witness to the events of 1264, a year of profound change and public humiliation for Henry. The political struggle has become intensely personal, and Simon, a man of fierce conviction and even fiercer ambition, is about to weaponize the king's weaknesses in a way that no one could have predicted. Simon de Montfort is an interesting paradox. He was a French nobleman who had married Henry's sister, Eleanor, not to be confused with the Queen, which is, to be fair, a little confusing. He was in many ways a perfect foil for the king. Where Henry was indecisive and artistic, Simon was a brilliant military strategist and a decisive leader. He was pious, but in a stern, puritanical way, not in Henry's gentle, aesthetic one. He saw Henry's lavish spending and his love of art as signs of moral decay, a corruption that needed to be purged from the kingdom. He wasn't just fighting for political reform, he was fighting for a moral crusade. The The culmination of this conflict is the Battle of Lewes in 1264. You're on the field, a ghost in the swirling chaos of medieval warfare. The clang of steel, the screams of men, the banner of de Montfort flying high. The battle is a disaster for the royalists. Henry, a reluctant and poor military leader, is outmanoeuvred and defeated. He's captured, along with his formidable son, Edward. For the first time in his life, the king is not just a puppet, he is a prisoner. This is where the story takes a dark and fascinating turn. With Henry under his control, Simon de Montfort now has the power to not only reshape the government, but to also dissect the king's persona. Simon and his allies, men who are deeply uncomfortable with Henry's unconventional nature, begin to exploit his perceived weaknesses. They don't just mock his policies, they mock the man himself. They ridicule his love of beautiful clothes, his penchant for poetry, his deep piety. They paint him as a weak, effeminate figure, a king who is not a man. There's a quirky, almost insidious tidbit from this time. De Montfort's men, in their propaganda, began to circulate crude poems and songs that made fun of the king's wardrobe. One of them, a piece of doggerel that survives in fragments, refers to Henry as the Queen with a beard, a cruel and direct assault on his identity. They are not just criticising his rule, they are questioning his very gender, using the language of ridicule to delegitimise his authority. This is a subtle but powerful act of psychological warfare. Simon de Montfort, a man who saw the world in black and white, understood that to truly defeat a king, you had to break his spirit, and to break his spirit you had to attack his deepest, most vulnerable self. The king's capture is a moment of profound personal crisis. He's no longer surrounded by the beautiful objects he loves. He is a prisoner, confined to a room with no tapestries, no gilded manuscripts. His clothes are taken from him, and he is forced to wear a plain, rough tunic. It is a calculated act of humiliation, a way of stripping him not just of his power, but of his identity. He is forced to live the life of a conventional man, a life he had spent his entire reign trying to avoid. Historians still argue whether Simon de Montfort's use of personal attacks against Henry was a legitimate political tactic, or a cruel, unmanly betrayal of their family ties. Was he simply a ruthless politician, or was there a genuine moral disgust behind his actions? The evidence suggests a blend of both. Simon was a man who believed in a strict traditional order, and Henry, with his unconventional nature, represented everything that was wrong with that order. Simon wasn't just trying to seize power, he was trying to restore a moral and social order that he believed had been corrupted. With Henry a prisoner, Simon is now the de facto ruler of England. He convenes a parliament that includes not just barons but knights, and burghers, a revolutionary act that foreshadows the future of English government. He is a genius, a visionary, but his rise to power is built in part on the public humiliation of the king, a man who dared to be different. The irony of a man fighting for the rights of the people while ridiculing the personal identity of the king is a powerful one. As you watch Henry in his captivity, you see the toll it takes on him. He is withdrawn, silent, a shadow of the man he was. He's a man stripped of his art, his clothes, and his sanctuary. The two worlds that he had so carefully kept separate are now violently colliding in the most public and humiliating way possible. He's a king who is a man, but the world now knows him as a woman with a beard. And in this moment of profound personal crisis, the kingdom is left without a leader, and Henry's wife, Eleanor, is about to show the world just how powerful a queen can be. With the king a prisoner and his authority shattered, the kingdom teeters on the brink of chaos. But where Henry's public persona crumbled, his queen's true strength is about to be revealed. You are now a witness to the events of 1264 and 1265, a period where Eleanor of Provence, the woman who had quietly ruled from the sidelines, steps into the spotlight and commands the world's attention. With Henry a captive in the Tower of London, you see a queen transformed from a shrewd political partner into a fierce, almost terrifying warrior. Eleanor's first reaction to the news of Henry's defeat and capture is not one of despair, but of righteous fury. She is in France at the time, gathering support and funds for Henry's war. The news galvanizes her. This is not just a political defeat. It is a personal attack on her family and on the man she loves. She becomes a relentless force of nature, a woman on a mission to restore her husband to the throne and to protect his secret at all costs. She knows that Simon de Montfort's victory is not just a political one, it's a moral and personal assault on Henry's very identity. She understands that the cruel propaganda, the crude poems, and the public humiliation of her husband are far more dangerous than any political manoeuvre. She begins a feverish campaign to raise an army. She uses her considerable political connections with her family, the House of Savoy, and with her brother-in-law, King Louis IX of France. She's a queen without a crown, but she's also a woman of immense power and influence. The mainstream historical fact is that Eleanor was instrumental in organising a powerful force of mercenaries and exiles to invade England and restore her husband to power. She sold her jewels, she raised loans from Italian bankers, and she used her sharp diplomatic skills to rally support from every corner of Europe. She was a master fundraiser and an exceptional military organiser, a role that was almost unheard of for a queen of her time. The quirky tidbit from this time, however, reveals a deeper motivation. Eleanor didn't just want to win the war, she wanted to crush Simon de Montfort and everyone who had dared to mock her husband. In her letters and her public declarations, she refers to de Montfort not just as a traitor, but as a vile and unmanly usurper who had brought dishonour to the sacred crown. She understood that the battle was not just for the throne, but for her husband's soul. Her ferocity, her almost fanatical devotion, was driven by a deep love and a fierce desire for revenge against those who had exposed and ridiculed the man she had so carefully protected for years. Historians still argue whether Eleanor's aggressive pursuit of military action was a testament to her unwavering loyalty, or a sign of her own unquenchable ambition. Was she a selfless defender of her husband, or was she a power-hungry queen who saw an opportunity to rule in her own right? The truth is a complex blend of both. Her actions were undoubtedly motivated by a deep love for Henry, but they also reveal a woman who was a natural leader, a queen who was far more capable of ruling than her husband. She had the political acumen and the steel will that Henry lacked, and in this moment of crisis, she used those qualities to their fullest extent. Meanwhile, back in England, Henry is a prisoner, and Simon de Montfort is the de facto king. You're a fly on the wall, watching as Simon attempts to govern. He calls a parliament that includes commoners, a revolutionary step that will one day change the course of history. But even in his moment of triumph, he is unable to control the country. He has captured the king, but he has not captured the kingdom. The country is in turmoil, and the threat of Eleanor's invasion looms large. The king in captivity is a shadow of his former self. He is a king without his crown, without his silks, without his beautiful world. He is a man who is forced to confront the harsh reality of his situation, to live a life that he had always tried to avoid. But even in his captivity, he is not alone. The quiet, devoted love of his wife is a constant source of strength, a beacon of hope in his dark world. He knows that she is fighting for him, and that knowledge keeps his spirit from breaking entirely. This period is a powerful testament to the unconventional love between Henry and Eleanor. Their relationship, which had been so misunderstood by their contemporaries, is now revealed to be the foundation of the entire kingdom. The man who was seen as weak and effeminate had a wife who was strong enough to fight his battles, to lead armies, and to command the respect of kings and bankers alike. The queen who was seen as a greedy foreign interloper was, in fact, the most formidable defender of the English crown. The capture of the king and the rise of the queen is a story of role reversal, a powerful and dramatic display of a partnership that was far more complex and far more powerful than anyone had ever imagined. The tide of war is about to turn. As Eleanor's forces gather across the Channel, a key player escapes Simon de Montfort's clutches. You're a silent witness to a great escape that will change the course of history. It's the spring of 1265, and Prince Edward, Henry and Eleanor's son, has been a prisoner of Simon de Montfort. But Edward is not his father. He is a warrior, a brilliant military tactician, and a man who is about to prove that he is a worthy heir to the crown. His escape from captivity is a pivotal moment, and it sets the stage for a dramatic reversal of fortune. Edward, now a young man in his late 20s, had been living under house arrest. He was a prisoner in his own kingdom, but he was also an heir with an army of loyal supporters. His escape is a story of daring and deception. The quirky tidbit here is that he reportedly feigned an illness, convincing his guards that he was too weak to ride. He then managed to get his hands on a series of fast horses, and in a moment of pure theatricality, raced away from his captors, leaving them in the dust. It was a move worthy of a storybook knight, and it electrified his supporters. With Edward free, the Royalist cause gains a new and powerful leader. He is everything Simon de Montfort is, a brilliant military mind, a decisive leader, and a man who commands respect. But he is also a son who is fiercely loyal to his father and his mother. He immediately begins to rally the Royalists, his charisma and his military prowess drawing in new supporters. The barons who had chafed under Simon's rule now have a new banner to rally under, a new hope for a return to a more traditional form of government. Meanwhile, Henry, still a prisoner, is enduring a period of deep personal crisis. He is now a tool in Simon de Montfort's hands, a royal figurehead used to give a veneer of legitimacy to the new government. You are a ghost in his chambers, watching him. He is a man who is physically free but emotionally and psychologically in chains. The stress of his captivity, the public humiliation, and the constant pressure to perform a role he hates takes a toll on him. He withdraws even further into himself, and you begin to see him suffer from what is publicly called a sickness. This sickness is the mainstream historical fact of this period. Henry was known to have bouts of a mysterious illness that would leave him weak and unable to govern. He would retreat from public life for weeks or even months at a time. The public explanation was that he was a pious king who was a little too frail for the burdens of governance. But you, as a silent observer, know the truth. This sickness is a cover for a deeper, more profound retreat. It is a psychological breakdown, a reaction to the public destruction of his private world. His physical ailments are a manifestation of his emotional and psychological distress. During these bouts of sickness, he is cared for by a small, trusted circle of servants who understand his true nature. They provide him with his beautiful clothes, his books, and his private chapel. This retreat is not just a time of rest, it is a time of healing, a time for him to reconnect with his true self. He is a man who needs to be in his world of beauty and piety to survive the brutal reality of his public life. The sickness is a necessary escape, a retreat into a world where he is not a prisoner but a man. Historians still argue whether Henry's sicknesses were genuine physical ailments or a form of psychological escapism. Was he truly ill, or was he a man who was so overwhelmed by the pressures of his life that his body simply gave up? The evidence suggests a deep connection between his emotional state and his physical health. The public humiliation, the destruction of his private world, and the constant pressure of living a double life were all taking a toll. His sickness was a way for his mind and body to cope with a reality that was simply too painful to bear. In these private moments of retreat, you see the true Henry. He's not a king, but a man who is trying to survive. He's a man who finds solace in the delicate tracery of a manuscript, the soft hum of a song, the feel of a beautiful fabric against his skin. This is the man Eleanor fell in love with, the man who she is now fighting so fiercely to restore. She is fighting not just for the crown, but for the right of her husband to live a life that is true to himself. And so, as the kingdom is torn apart by civil war, you see two very different men at the heart of the conflict. One is a brilliant warrior, a man who is fighting for the crown and for a traditional idea of kingship. The other is a gentle artistic soul, a man who is fighting for the right to be himself. The outcome of this war will not just determine the future of England, it will also determine the fate of the king who dared to live a secret life. And as you'll see in the coming section, the ferocity of the Queen's love will be the deciding factor in this war. While Henry retreats into his quiet world of sickness, and Edward marshals the loyalist forces, you see the true engine of the Restoration. It's not the prince's military genius or the baron's sudden shift in loyalty. It is the unwavering, fierce devotion of Queen Eleanor. We're in the year 1265, and the Queen, from her base in France, becomes a whirlwind of activity, a force so potent that her enemies genuinely begin to fear her. You witness a queen whose love for her husband is so profound that she is willing to do anything to see him restored, not just to his throne, but to his self. Eleanor's devotion is more than just a royal duty. It is a primal, protective instinct. She is not just fighting for a crown, she is fighting for the man she loves, the man whose secret she holds so close to her heart. She knows that Simon de Montfort and his allies have not just defeated Henry, they have publicly humiliated him, stripped him of his dignity, and attacked his very identity. This is a personal battle for her, a matter of honour and love. Her fury is a fire, and it burns with an intensity that the warrior men of her time simply cannot comprehend. You're a ghost in her court in France, a place of constant motion and hushed urgency. She is everywhere, her mind working 1,000 steps ahead. She's not a woman in despair, she's a woman in command. She meets with her brother-in-law, the great King Louis IX, a man known for his piety and his sense of justice. She argues her case with a passion and a clarity that are breathtaking to behold. She reminds him that Henry is a fellow monarch, a divinely appointed king who has been wronged. She doesn't beg, she demands. She uses her family ties, her charm, and her undeniable intelligence to secure his support and, most importantly, his funds. The mainstream historical fact here is that Eleanor's political and diplomatic efforts were absolutely crucial to the royalist cause. She was an exceptionally gifted diplomat who managed to turn the tide of international opinion in her favour. She secured significant financial support from various European powers, particularly from her family in Provence and from King Louis of France. She was, in essence, the royalist foreign policy expert and head of logistics, a role that was, again, highly unusual for a queen of her time. Without her relentless efforts, the royalist forces would have been a mere faction, easily crushed. With her, they became a genuine threat. And then there's the quirky, personal tidbit that reveals the depth of her devotion. Eleanor, in her public pronouncements, made a point of referring to Henry not as King Henry, but as my lord and love. It was a subtle but powerful act of defiance. She was reminding the world that their relationship was not just a political alliance, it was a deep personal bond. She was telling everyone that she saw him not as a weak king, but as the man she loved, a man who was worthy of her fierce loyalty. This was a way of fighting back against the crude propaganda of de Montfort's men, a quiet but potent act of love. Historians still argue whether Eleanor's unwavering devotion was a sign of her complete subjugation to her husband, or a testament to the strength of their partnership. Was she a queen who was simply doing her duty, or was she a co-ruler who saw Henry's unconventional nature as a strength, not a weakness? The evidence points to the latter. She was a woman who understood that their combined strengths, his love of beauty and piety, her political and financial acumen, made them a powerful and unconventional team. She was not just serving a king, she was protecting a partnership. As her forces gather across the Channel, you witness the Queen's strategic mind at work. She's not a general, but she's a brilliant strategist. She plans the logistics, the funding, and the political messaging. She knows that the war will not be won with swords alone, it will be won with money and with public opinion. She's a master of both, and she uses her talents to their fullest extent. She is the unseen hand that is guiding the war, the quiet force that is about to unleash a wave of royalist power on England. Her devotion also extends to her children. She's particularly concerned with her son, Edward, now the military leader of the royalist cause. She knows that Edward is a warrior, a man who is the very embodiment of the kind of king his father was expected to be. But she also knows that Edward is her son, and she loves him deeply. She writes to him constantly, offering not just political advice, but words of encouragement and maternal affection. She's not just a queen, she's a mother who is doing everything in her power to protect her family and her dynasty. Eleanor's fierce devotion to Henry is the central theme of this period. It is what allows him to survive his captivity. It is what gives Edward the strength to fight. It is what turns the tide of the war. She is the rock, the anchor, the quiet but powerful force that is holding the royalist cause together. And as you'll see in the next section, her unwavering loyalty will be rewarded in a spectacular way, as Edward's military genius comes to the fore and the final act of this royal drama begins to unfold. The stage is set for the climax, and the Queen's love will be the final word. The Queen's love has set the stage, and now the great heir she fought for takes centre stage. You are now a ghost on the fields of England in the year 1265, and the sound of Eleanor's coming army is a drumbeat in the distance. But the man you're watching now is a different kind of king entirely. He is Henry's son, Edward, and he is a warrior forged in steel and fire. With his dramatic escape from captivity, he has become the new hope for the royalist cause, a stark and powerful contrast to his father's gentle, artistic soul. Edward is everything a medieval king was supposed to be. He is tall, almost preternaturally so, with a powerful physique and a commanding presence. He is a master of the joust and the tournament, a brilliant military strategist, and a man who is utterly at home on the battlefield. You watch him rally his supporters, his voice a clear, ringing command, his eyes filled with a steely resolve that his father never possessed. He is the very embodiment of masculine power and medieval virtue. He is a son who is a hero and a prince who is a general. His campaign is swift and brutal. He is a soldier, and he fights with a soldier's precision. He raises an army, outmanoeuvres Simon de Montfort's forces, and corners them on the fields near the town of Evesham. The ensuing battle is a massacre, a brutal and decisive end to the Barons' War. You see the sheer ferocity of the fighting, the clash of swords, the screams of men. Edward is in the thick of it, a whirlwind of death and destruction. He is fighting not just for his father's crown, but for his family's honour. It is a moment of profound victory, a turning point in the war and a testament to his military genius. The mainstream historical fact here is that the Battle of Evesham in August 1265 was a resounding victory for Prince Edward, leading to the death of Simon de Montfort and the restoration of Henry III to full power. It was a decisive and brutal end to a bloody civil war. The battle cemented Edward's reputation as a brilliant military leader, a man who would one day be known as Longshanks, and who would conquer Wales and fight in Scotland. He was a king in the making, and his actions at Evesham proved it. But here's the most poignant and fascinating part of this story. Edward is a son who is completely, utterly unaware of his father's secret life. He loves and respects his father as a king and a parent, but he doesn't understand him as a man. He sees his father's love of beautiful things, his piety, and his retreats into a private world as an eccentricity, a flaw, a kind of weakness that he, as a man of action, must overcome. He sees Henry's meticulousness over a new tapestry or a piece of jewellery as a waste of time, an unmanly indulgence that got the kingdom into trouble in the first place. For Edward, the world is a simple, straightforward place of duty and honour, and his father's complexities are a puzzle he doesn't have the time or the inclination to solve. There's a quirky tidbit that illustrates this dynamic beautifully. A story, passed down through chroniclers, tells of a time when Edward, as a young man, was walking with his father through the royal chapel. Henry, ever the perfectionist, stopped and began to scold a master craftsman for a carving on a capital that was not to his liking. Edward, impatient, reportedly said, "My lord, there are battles to be won, and you worry about the placement of a leaf?" It was a moment of complete and total misunderstanding, a chasm of perspective between two men who were father and son, yet living in completely different worlds. Edward saw the world through the lens of a warrior, and Henry saw it through the lens of an artist. Historians still argue whether Edward had any inkling of his father's unconventional nature. Was he truly oblivious, or did he, in some deep, unspoken part of himself, understand but choose to ignore it? The evidence suggests that he was genuinely unaware. He saw his father as a pious, kind, but ultimately weak king, who was too easily swayed by his passions and his love of beautiful things. He didn't see it as a sign of a deeper, gender-fluid identity. He saw it as a simple matter of his father's eccentric personality, a personality that needed to be protected from the harsh realities of the world. He respected his father as king, but he could not truly understand him as a man. The dynamic between them is a complex and sometimes tragic one. Henry is immensely proud of his son's strength and military prowess. He sees Edward as the son he was never able to be, the embodiment of the kind of king England needs. But there is also a distance between them, a quiet, unspoken chasm that separates them. Edward is a man of action, and Henry is a man of contemplation. They love each other, but they don't truly understand each other. And then there is Eleanor, the ultimate bridge between these two worlds. She is the one who understands both her son's pragmatic world and her husband's artistic one. She is the one who keeps the two from colliding. She knows that Edward's strength is what saved them, but she also knows that Henry's gentle soul is what makes him the man she loves. She's the keeper of the secret, and she works tirelessly to ensure that her son's respect for his father is never tarnished by a truth he would never be able to understand. She is the one who will ensure that the final years of Henry's reign are peaceful and that his legacy, however misunderstood, is protected. The stage is now set for the final act. Henry is restored to his throne, but he's a man changed by his captivity. Edward is a hero, the saviour of the kingdom, a man whose future is bright and powerful. And Eleanor is the queen who has secured her family's future. The Barons' War is over, but the quiet, personal struggle of the king who lived as a woman is far from finished. The kingdom may have found peace, but the quiet, unspoken truth of the royal family is a secret that will, as you'll see, linger long after the final curtain falls. With the Barons' War a bloody memory, a strange kind of peace settles over the kingdom. Henry is once again a king in full, but he is a king changed by his experience. You are now a witness to the final years of his reign, a time when the kingdom learns to live with its eccentric monarch, but the truth of his life remains a closely guarded secret. The years are now the late 1260s and early 1270s, and you see Henry, a man in his late 50s, a figure who is a blend of the pious king, the devoted artist, and the broken man who was once a prisoner. Henry's return to power is not a moment of triumphant glory, but a quiet, almost reluctant affair. He is no longer the ambitious, idealistic king of his youth. He is a man who has learned the harsh lessons of power, a man who has seen his world crumble and been rebuilt by the strength of his wife and son. He is a king who has been humbled, and it has changed him. He is still obsessed with Westminster Abbey, and the construction continues at a furious pace. But his focus is no longer on grand political statements. It is on the quiet, personal details of his piety and his art. You watch him in his private chapel, a place where he spends more and more of his time. He's no longer surrounded by the pomp and circumstance of the court. He's often alone, praying, reading his beautiful Book of Hours, or simply lost in contemplation. The quirky personal tidbit here is that he developed a habit of wearing a plain hair shirt under his rich robes, an act of private piety that was meant to mortify the flesh, but also perhaps an act of self-flagellation for the perceived failures of his reign. It was a secret act, a quiet protest against the lavishness of his public life, a way of staying grounded in a world that he found increasingly difficult to navigate. The mainstream historical fact of this period is that Henry III's reign in its final years was characterised by a period of relative peace and stability. His son, Edward, now the true power behind the throne, was a brilliant and effective administrator. He handled the affairs of state, managed the army, and governed with a firm hand. Henry, for his part, was content to let him. He was a king who was, in his own way, semi-retired. He was a figurehead, a symbol of stability, while his son ran the country. This arrangement, so unusual for a medieval kingdom, was a perfect solution for a king who had no love for the daily grind of governance. The court, now a place of stability and order, had also learned to live with the king's eccentricities. They had learned to respect his love of art, his piety, and his retreats into a private world. They no longer openly mocked him. They simply accepted that he was a different kind of king. They had seen his kingdom crumble and been rebuilt, and they knew that the man who had done it was not Henry, but Eleanor and Edward. They had a new respect for the quiet power of the Queen and the brute strength of the Prince, and they knew that the stability of the kingdom was built on their foundation, not on Henry's. Historians still argue whether Henry in his final years was a truly happy man. Was he content to be a figurehead, to be a king in name only, or was he a man who had been broken by his experiences and was simply going through the motions? The evidence suggests a blend of both. He was undoubtedly content to be relieved of the burdens of governance, to be able to focus on the things he truly loved. But he was also a man who had been through a civil war, a man who had been a prisoner, a man who had been publicly humiliated. There was a quiet sadness in his eyes, a sense of loss that no amount of beautiful art or pious prayer could fully erase. He was a man who had survived, but he had not been unbroken by the experience. His secret life, however, remained a secret. Eleanor, ever the fierce protector, was still the sole confidant of his truth. She and Henry, in their final years, were a quiet, gentle couple, two people who had weathered a storm together and who now found solace in each other's presence. You see them in the royal palaces, sitting together, talking quietly, a world away from the noise and the politics of the court. They were two people who had found a love that was deeper than any conventional marriage, a love that was built on a shared secret and a profound understanding of each other's souls. This period is a powerful testament to the enduring nature of their love and the quiet strength of their partnership. The kingdom may have had a king, but the true power lay with the queen and the prince, and the true soul of the kingdom lay with the man who was content to be a king of art and piety, a man who had finally found a way to live a life that was true to himself. even if he had to do it in the quiet shadows of a grand and beautiful palace. The kingdom was at peace, but the quiet, unspoken truth of the king who lived as a woman was a secret that, as you'll see, would linger long after he was gone. With Henry's final years a quiet testament to a life lived on his own terms, you now witness how his public image, that of a pious but weak king, came to be. This is a story of contrast, of a public narrative that was carefully constructed and a private truth that remained hidden. We are in the last years of his reign, a time when the kingdom had to reconcile the man who ruled them with the man they thought they knew. This is where the legend of Henry III, the gentle but ineffective king, truly takes hold, and it's a legend that serves as a powerful shield for the truth. The mainstream historical fact is that Henry III's reputation as a weak and ineffectual king was solidified by the chroniclers of his own time and the historians who came after him. They saw his reign through a lens of military failure, political blunders, and financial irresponsibility. The Baron's War, his disastrous attempts to reclaim lost lands in France, and his constant need for money were all seen as signs of a fundamentally flawed monarch. His love of art and his deep piety were often cited as a cause, not a symptom, of his political failings. They saw him as a man who was too soft, too refined to be a true king. They were telling a story that was easy to understand, a story of a weak king and his strong son, a story of a kingdom that was saved by a man of action, not a man of contemplation. But you, a quiet witness to his life, know that this public perception is a stark contrast to his private reality. The man who was seen as weak was, in fact, a man of immense personal courage, a man who dared to live a life that was fundamentally at odds with the expectations of his time. The man who was seen as ineffectual was a man who, in his own way, was a revolutionary, a man who saw the world not in terms of power and conquest, but in terms of art, beauty, and spirituality. His weakness was, in fact, his strength, the courage it took to be himself in a world that demanded he be someone else. The quirky tidbit here is that one of the most famous chroniclers of the time, Matthew Paris, was a monk who worked at St. Albans Abbey, a monastery that was heavily influenced by the Cistercian order, an order that placed a great deal of emphasis on austerity and simplicity. Matthew Paris was a man who saw Henry's lavish spending and his love of beautiful things as a sign of moral decay. He was a man who, in his own way, was prejudiced against Henry's aesthetic sensibilities. He wrote about Henry's love of art and beautiful clothes with a certain disdain, a tone that was more like a disapproving parent than an objective historian. He was not just recording history, he was shaping it, and he was shaping it in a way that served his own moral and political beliefs. Historians still argue whether the public perception of Henry III as a weak king was a deliberate act of propaganda by his political enemies, or an honest, if misguided, assessment of his reign. Was it a conscious effort to delegitimize his rule, or a simple failure to understand a man who was so fundamentally different from his contemporaries? The evidence suggests that it was a blend of both. His enemies, like Simon de Montfort, undoubtedly used his eccentricities to their political advantage, but the chroniclers, the men who wrote the history of his time, were also men who simply could not understand a king who was more interested in a stained glass window than a military campaign. They were men of their time, and their time had a very narrow definition of what a king should be. The contrast between the public and private Henry is a powerful and poignant one. In public, he was a king who was seen as a failure, a man who had lost a war and a kingdom. In private, he was a man who had found a way to be himself, a man who had created a world of beauty and piety that was a quiet, revolutionary act. His legacy, therefore, is a double one. In the history books, he is the weak king who was saved by his son. But in the quiet, unspoken truth of his life, he is a man who dared to live a life that was true to himself, a man who found a way to be a king of art and beauty in a world that only valued power and conquest. The true legacy of Henry III is not in the battles he lost or the money he spent, but in the quiet, revolutionary act of being himself. He was a man who bent the rules of his time, a man who found a way to be a man and a woman in a world that only allowed for one. His public legacy is a story of failure, but his private legacy is a story of triumph, a story of a man who found a way to be a king, not in the way the world wanted him to be, but in the way he was truly meant to be. And it is this quiet, private triumph that is the most powerful and enduring part of his story. The final chapters of Henry's life are a quiet, poignant reflection on a partnership that was the true foundation of his reign, You now witness the last stand of Queen Eleanor, a period when her focus shifts from military triumph to the careful curation of her husband's legacy. We are in the early 1370s, and the Queen, now a woman in her 50s, is still a force to be reckoned with. But her battlefields are no longer on a foreign shore. They are in the hushed corridors of Westminster Abbey and in the public memory of the kingdom. Eleanor's final acts are a masterclass in devotion and strategic planning. She knows that Henry's public reputation is not secure. The chroniclers have already begun to write the history of his reign, and they are not kind. They paint a picture of a weak, ineffectual king who was saved by his strong son. Eleanor knows that this narrative, while politically convenient, is a betrayal of the truth. She knows that Henry's secret life, his gentle soul, and his profound artistic vision are the things that truly defined him, and she is determined to protect that truth, to ensure that his legacy is not just one of failure, but one of a man who dared to be different. Her first act is to secure the construction of Westminster Abbey. The project, which was Henry's great passion, is still not finished. She pours her own money into it, using the vast wealth she accumulated as Queen to ensure that her husband's greatest work is completed in his lifetime. She personally oversees the final details, making sure that every carving, every stained glass window, every intricate detail is exactly as Henry had envisioned it. This is more than just a building project. It is an act of love, a monument to the man she loves, a physical testament to his secret life. The mainstream historical fact here is that Eleanor of Provence was a major benefactor of Westminster Abbey and other religious institutions. Her wealth and her devotion to the church were well known. She was a woman who saw her role not just as a queen, but as a patron of the arts and a pious devotee. She used her money to fund her husband's projects, to ensure that his vision of a new holy city in London was realised. She was, in many ways, the silent co-architect of Westminster Abbey. De Google Cap Fep. But the quirky tidbit is the nature of her patronage. Eleanor's donations to the Abbey were often accompanied by a quiet, unspoken request. She would commission a small, intricate carving, or a delicate piece of embroidery, that had a personal meaning for her and Henry. There are records of her commissioning a carving of two intertwined hands, a silent symbol of their love and their partnership. She was not just donating money, she was leaving a mark, a subtle, personal tribute to the man she had loved and protected for so long. Historians still argue whether Eleanor's devotion to her husband's legacy was a selfless act of love, or a calculated attempt to secure her own position and the future of her children. Was she a woman who was simply devoted to her husband, or was she a shrewd political operator who knew that the best way to secure her family's future was to control the narrative of the past? The evidence suggests a blend of both. She was a woman who loved her husband deeply, but she was also a woman who was a product of her time, a woman who knew that power was fleeting, and that a strong legacy was the only thing that would last. Her final act of protection is to ensure that Henry's secret life remains a secret. She knows that her son, Edward, is a man of a different time, a man who would never understand his father's unconventional nature. She knows that if the truth were ever to come out, it would tarnish the reputation of the royal family and could even destabilise the kingdom. She and Henry, in their final years, are a quiet, conspiratorial couple, two people who share a secret that they will take to their graves. They talk about their life together, their love, and the beautiful world they had built, a world that was a quiet, revolutionary act. Eleanor's last stand is not on a battlefield. It is in the quiet, reflective moments of her life, in the choices she makes, in the legacy she leaves behind. She is a woman who has lived a life of immense power and influence, a woman who has been a queen and a mother, a warrior and a patron. But in the end, she is a woman who is defined by her love for her husband, a love that was so deep and so profound that she was willing to do anything to protect him, to protect his legacy, and to protect his secret. And as you'll see in the next section, her devotion will be rewarded in a final poignant act of self-expression from the king himself. With the kingdom at peace, and the narrative of his reign carefully tended by his devoted queen, you now bear witness to the king's final, poignant act of self-expression. We are in the last weeks of 1272, and Henry III is a man in his final years, frail but at peace. The beautiful Westminster Abbey, his great passion, is now nearing completion, a soaring testament to his vision. He lies in his bedchamber, a room filled not with the cold stone of a fortress, but with the rich tapestries and beautiful objects he loved so much. His wife, Eleanor, is by his side, a silent, loving presence. This is not a moment of political intrigue or military manoeuvring. This is a moment of quiet reflection, a man preparing for a final journey. The king has lived his entire life in two worlds, the public, masculine world of a monarch and the private, feminine world of his soul. He has been a warrior and an artist, a king and a woman, and in this final moment, he is preparing to be just one thing, himself. He knows that his life has been a quiet, revolutionary act, and he knows that his legacy will be a complex and misunderstood one. But in this final moment, he is not concerned with legacy. He is concerned with truth. The mainstream historical fact here is that on his deathbed, Henry III made a final, powerful testament to his piety and his love for Westminster Abbey. He requested to be buried in the tomb of Edward the Confessor, the last Anglo-Saxon king, whose memory he had so passionately sought to honour. He wanted his body to be laid to rest in the very heart of the cathedral he had built, a testament to his faith and his vision. This was a king who saw his life's work not in battles won, but in cathedrals built. His final request was not for a military monument, but for a tomb of quiet, spiritual significance. But the quirky personal tidbit is the nature of his final instructions to his servants. In his final hours, he reportedly asked to be dressed not in his royal robes, but in a simple, beautiful linen garment, one of the garments he had reserved for his most private moments of contemplation and prayer. He requested that a simple, beautiful ring he had always worn on a chain around his neck be placed on his finger, a ring that was not a sign of his kingship but a symbol of his personal devotion. It was a final quiet act of self-expression, a way of shedding the heavy mantle of his public persona and embracing his true self, the self that only Eleanor had ever truly known. He was preparing to meet his maker, and he was going to do it as a man who was finally and completely himself. Historians still argue whether Henry's final instructions were a sign of his deep piety or a final poignant act of self-expression. Was he simply a pious king who wanted to be buried in a humble monastic way, or was he a man who, in his final moments, was making a powerful statement about his identity? The evidence, when viewed in the context of his entire life, points strongly to the latter. He was a man who had lived a life of quiet rebellion, and his death was a final, powerful act of defiance. He was a king who, in his final moments, was choosing to be a man of art and beauty, not a man of power and conquest. You're a silent witness to this final scene. The king is no longer a public figure. He is a man surrounded by the people who love him. Eleanor, his wife and his partner, is by his side, her hand in his. She's a woman who has spent her life protecting his secret, and in this final moment, she's a woman who is simply saying goodbye to the man she loves. She knows that his life has been a complex and difficult one, but she also knows that it has been a life of immense courage and beauty. She is there not just as his queen, but as his confidant, the only person in the world who truly understood him. The king's final transformation is a quiet and beautiful one. He is a man who has lived his life in two worlds, and in his death he is finally able to bring those two worlds together. He is a king who will be buried in the heart of the cathedral he built, a symbol of his reign. But he is also a man who will be buried in a simple, beautiful garment, a symbol of his soul. His final act is a testament to the power of truth, the power of love, and the quiet, enduring power of a man who dared to live a life that was true to himself. And as you'll see in the final section, his quiet legacy will be a secret that, in a way, will never truly die. The king is dead. Long live the king. As Henry's body is laid to rest in the magnificent Westminster Abbey he so painstakingly built, you bear witness to the quiet transfer of power and the birth of a whispered legacy. We are in the final moments of 1272, and the kingdom, for all its turmoil, is now stable. The new king, Edward I, is a man of a very different mould from his father, and in his ascent, the secrets of the old king are carefully and perhaps permanently buried. The funeral of Henry III is a public spectacle of immense proportions. The great and the good of the kingdom are there, along with a vast crowd of ordinary people. It is a moment of public mourning, a grand performance of respect for a king who, in many ways, was a great patron of the arts and a pious monarch. The ceremony is held in the heart of Westminster Abbey, his life's work, a soaring testament to his vision. He's buried in the tomb of Edward the Confessor, fulfilling his final wish, a quiet and spiritual end for a man who had lived such a complex life. But you, a ghost in the crowd, know that this is a performance. You know that the public king who is being mourned is not the whole man. You know that the quiet, gentle soul who loved beautiful things and who had lived a life of quiet rebellion is a secret that is now in the hands of the new king and the old queen. Edward, now a man in his 30s, is a different kind of king. He is a warrior, a conqueror, a man of action. He's not a man who would ever understand the quiet, feminine soul of his father. He respects his father, but he does not understand him, and in that lack of understanding, the secret is safe. The mainstream historical fact here is that Edward I's reign began with a period of unprecedented stability and prosperity. He was a brilliant military leader and a powerful king who would go on to reform English law, conquer Wales, and earn the epithet the Hammer of the Scots. He was a stark contrast to his father, a man who, in the popular imagination, was the very definition of a strong medieval king. His reign, in many ways, was a deliberate rejection of his father's style of rule, a turning away from the art and piety of his father's court, and a return to the brutal pragmatism of his warrior ancestors. But the quirky tidbit, the final piece of the puzzle, is the role of Eleanor in the transfer of power. As Edward is crowned king, Eleanor, now the Dowager Queen, is a quiet presence by his side. She is a woman who has spent her life protecting her husband's secret, and in this final moment she is ensuring that the secret remains buried. She and Edward have a quiet, unspoken pact. She knows that his father's eccentricity, his love of beautiful things, his sicknesses, were things that Edward saw as flaws. She knows that to preserve the dignity of the crown and the memory of her husband, the truth must never be spoken. She's a woman who, in her final acts, is the ultimate keeper of the secret, the final guardian of the truth. Historians still argue whether Edward I had any inkling of his father's true nature. Was he completely unaware, or did he have a quiet, unspoken knowledge of his father's secret that he simply chose to ignore? The evidence suggests that he was a man who saw the world in black and white, a man who would never have been able to understand the complexities of his father's soul. He loved his father, but he did not understand him, and in that lack of understanding, the secret was safe. The new king, in his ambition and his strength, was the perfect heir for a kingdom that wanted to forget the quiet, unconventional reign of his father. The story closes with a quiet, lingering question. As the great and the good of the kingdom leave the funeral, they talk of Henry's piety, his love of art, and his magnificent abbey. But they do not talk of the man who wore beautiful clothes in private, the man who found solace in the quiet world of his soul. They do not talk of the king who lived as a woman. That is a secret that is buried with the king, a quiet, unspoken truth that is carried only in the hearts of the few who truly knew him. The kingdom is at peace, and a new era has begun, an era of conquest and power. But in the hushed, tapestry-lined corridors of Westminster Abbey, a quiet secret lingers, a whispered legacy of a king who dared to be himself. The sounds of the kingdom are fading. The clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the low hum of the crowd, the rustle of leaves in the autumn wind. All of it is slowly growing softer. The story of the king who lived as a woman is over, but the memory of his courage, his quiet rebellion, and his love of beauty is a secret that, in a way, will never truly die. His tomb, at the heart of the cathedral he built, is a testament to a life that was both public and private, a life that was both a triumph and a tragedy. And in the quiet of the night, in the hushed shadows of the world, a whisper of a secret remains, a secret that tells the story of a man who found a way to be a king, not in the way the world wanted him to be, but in the way he was truly meant to be. The quiet of the chamber is all that remains. The story is told, the journey is over. The great and beautiful king is at rest, and the world is moving on. It's time for you to do the same. Let the sounds of the past fade away, and let the quiet of the present take over. Drift now into the quiet, into the calm, and let yourself be carried away into the gentle arms of sleep.